Hi everyone, it's Agnieszka from 5 Minute Language. Welcome to my channel. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already and give this video a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to download your free language learning starter guide from the description box below. So today's video is about learning languages with apps. There are plenty of language learning apps available, and I'm sure you have tried at least one of them. I have spoken about apps before in my other videos. I've done app reviews. I have used apps myself before for learning languages. But today I'm going to talk about why you should not be using apps and the problem with using apps when learning a foreign language. So let's get started. So the first issue with using apps for language learning is that pretty much all language learning apps available at the moment have this gaming element, which basically makes it feel like you're playing a game. So there's different challenges, you gain points, you have lives and all that kind of stuff that resembles video games. And it can be a very motivating thing for many people, but it also emphasizes this idea that you always have to do things correctly, that you always have to do things right, and failure is actually penalized. So when you make a mistake, when you get an answer wrong, you usually lose a life. So you've got 5 lives available, and then if you make a mistake, you lose one of them. And then if you get to 0, then presumably you fail the whole thing. Whereas failure really in language learning is a very important thing. So it's something that we should actually be doing all the time in order to learn. So I'm going to use a metaphor to explain what the problem with that is. So imagine you're learning how to break an egg. If you're making pancakes, for example, or if you're making a cake, or just scrambled eggs, you need to break the egg. You need to make sure that you don't get any eggshells in the bowl, because otherwise you'll be eating eggshells in your scrambled eggs or in your pancakes. So when you do it the first time round, you're always going to get eggshells in. Even if you've done it hundreds of times before, you're always going to get at least a little tiny eggshell in your egg. But the thing is, the more you practice, the more you do it, the more eggs you break, the better you become at breaking eggs. So language learning is a bit like that. You need to be trying things, you need to be making those mistakes in order to see how you can improve and how you can take your language learning to the next level. Okay, the second thing that is a bit of a problem when it comes to learning languages with apps is that they tend to teach you snippets of information which are taken out of context. So, for example, you are given examples of sentences or individual words, and you are told to memorize them or to translate them or to choose the correct meaning. These things are often taken out of context because we don't know what the big picture is. And it makes it a little bit more difficult to place that piece of information back into the context when you need to use it in the real world. So that's why, in my other videos, I talk a lot about reading, the importance of reading when learning a foreign language, the importance of looking up lots of examples in context, so in articles, in news stories, in books, and so on. When you read, you can see the bigger picture. You can see how a word or a phrase functions within that bigger picture. So when you're using a language learning app, you're just given that little tiny snippet of information, which can be helpful, but it doesn't allow you to understand how that thing would work in an actual big piece of language. Okay, the next thing about language learning with apps is that they emphasize passive learning. So instead of emphasizing active learning. So passive learning is all about being given questions and answering those questions. Often when you open a language learning app, you've got multiple choice questions, for example. So for example, you're given a word or a phrase and you're given 3 answers and you need to choose the translation of that phrase or that word. And that is passive learning because you are being given the options, you're presented with all the information, some of it is correct, some of it is incorrect, and all you need to do is choose which one is correct. So you're not being asked really to produce anything. Some apps are better at this than others. In some apps you are encouraged to produce your own language, but most of the activities that I have seen recently focus on that passive element of learning. So when you learn languages in a different way, when you do a lot of reading, when you try to produce the language yourself, when you practice speaking, for example, by giving a presentation or pretending that you're giving an interview. These are all active ways of learning because you are producing language yourself. And I guess to a certain extent, you need both of these elements. You need the passive learning and you need the active learning. But the problem with just using a language learning app is that it focuses most of the time on the passive learning. So these three things, the fact that apps emphasize failure as being a bad thing, they emphasize passive learning, and they only give you snippets of information rather than the big picture. Other than that, apps can be a great tool for learning a language. And I would say, and if you're using a language learning app, you need to treat it as just one resource out of many. So apps are, for example, great for beginners. So if you're just starting out, if you want to get a little taster of the language that you're learning, if you don't know anything in a language, then by all means start with an app because that will give you a good idea of what the language is like, whether you like it or not, whether it's difficult or not, and it will give you some good foundations that you can then build upon. Language learning apps are also great for things like going on holiday. So if you need a language for a very particular reason very quickly, obviously you're not going to get completely fluent in the language by using a language learning app for a couple of weeks, but you will get to a stage where you can, for example, say hello or order a drink or order a meal in the language when you go on holiday, or if you've got any other particular specific reason where you need to learn the language in the short term. Apps are also really great for diversifying the number of resources that you're using. I always say in my videos that you should be using lots of different resources. The more resources you use, the more efficient your language learning will become. So rather than just using a textbook, use a textbook, watch YouTube videos, listen to a podcast, do vocabulary work, do some speaking, do a language exchange, and use a language learning app. So all these things put together will give you a good kind of foundation for language learning. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below whether you have used language learning apps and what was your favorite thing about them and what you didn't like about them. It would be great to see different people's ideas and experiences. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.